guys are fired up by the Steelers, huh? Man, can't wait.
Yeah, we are fired up. D'Amico didn't seem all that fired up to be in the press conference. Today, we're going to be joined by Todd Haley, who, as I get my stuff straight here, over 20 years of NFL coaching experience, including 6 years as offensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and, of course, head coach of the Chiefs. He's the last offensive coordinator to win a playoff game for the Steelers back in 2016. You can find him currently on the Believe in Steelers podcast. Follow him on X at the Todd Haley. And Todd, thank you for joining us. I'm jealous of your long and lustrous flowing locks that you have right now. Look at the hair on you.
It's nice when you don't have to answer to anybody and your girlfriend likes long hair, so you just don't cut it. You save a lot of money. I've saved a lot of money in the last 3 years of haircuts. So
you got your playoff beard going already and everything?
Always. That's normal. But being a hockey fan and a football fan, you got to grow it out in the fall.
I was really happy that they were able to set this interview up with you because, man, D'Amico this week I thought was the perfect example of what life as an NFL head coach is like and what their mindset is. So the Texans are on a 9-game win streak. They finished as the number 2 scoring defense in the NFL. And when asked about his defense, here's the choice 30 seconds he gave us.
Defense, they did a really nice job throughout the entire year, limiting points specifically. That's what makes you a good defense. Also, playing well in the passing game. But we didn't end the year well defensively. When it comes to giving up explosive plays, is really not good enough defensively. So we got to do a much better job if we want to advance and play longer in the playoffs. We got to play much better defense. So it didn't end how it should have.
Yeah. So awesome defense this year. Everybody's gushing about him. D'Amico was. I think he looked as agitated and as surly as D'Amico can get in that press conference. And I think that they were very aware. There's a quote of Matt Burke, the defensive coordinator, about how much they respect the number 1 scoring defense. And they finished just shy of it, 0.2 points per game below the Seahawks. And it just, they're like D'Amico I've always said this. There's nobody more miserable than an NFL coach on a winning streak, because you've had it driven into your head over and over again about the dangers of complacency.
Oh yeah, you're trying to find ways to be ticked off. Coach Parcells used to walk in my office and pull his shoe open and show me a rock in there, and he goes, "Todd, you got to do that. When things are going good, you got to get your mind right. You can't let people relax." So I love D'Amico. I love what he's done. I love the energy, but he gets it. It very easily you can fall into that trap of thinking you're better than what you are, or relaxing a little bit, and in the NFL, that'll jump up and bite you every single time. So I think when I was with the Chiefs and we were on our way to division title, I would not tell the team that we were a good team. I said, we're not good yet. And then, we win the division, they're, "Coach, are we good yet?" And I go, "No, we're not good yet." So you do anything you can to try to, keep everybody's mind in the right space.
This defense has obviously been really good this year. Where D'Amico's been agitated is that they've allowed some explosive pass plays over the last few weeks. They had gone the first part of the season, they allowed 3 300-yard passing performances. They've allowed 300 yards in 5 of the last 6 games, and they've had to play backups in the secondary. Both the cornerbacks, both Kamari Lassiter and Derek Stingley, have been working through injuries. They just released Kayvon Wallace, who is the safety who had started the last couple games. And I think if you're looking for weaknesses on the defense, it's that they at times allow explosive plays. Every other area, they're top 5 in every category. In terms of explosive plays, they're about middle of the pack. So I guess the question versus the Steelers is, do the Steelers have the ability to exploit that?
Number one, it starts with the guys up front, and I think, when Stingley and Lassiter are in there, man, it's a perfect combination. I can't believe how fast this defense is, up front, and how much ground they cover. Even when there is a slight breakdown, their ability to recover. We saw it against the Bills, Josh Allen, who gets out and runs away from everybody. I mean, he was getting tracked down, in a crazy fashion. So, I think, when you get a little complacent in the back end, thinking the guys up front are going to get there, and you relax a little bit. So I'm sure all that coaching is going on. As far as the Steelers, having DK Metcalf back is huge. If right now he wasn't playing, I'd have a different answer. But, there is one big dude out there that you have to be aware of all the time. And me as an offensive coordinator, I don't care if he had the name of DK or he was Darius Hayward-Bay or, some unknown that could run 4-3. As long as you have him out there to run through the defense and cause, make you at least respect it. I think, that at least give some thought for the Texans anyway to worry a little bit about this big guy.
Well, I guess the other guy, DK Metcalf's an obvious one. The guy that I'm curious about and why he hasn't just been more productive this year is Freiermuth, because he did some good things against the Ravens. I've seen him pop up, but you look at the numbers on the season, and it's just he hasn't been nearly as active as I think I would have expected.
No, I was pretty vocal on Sirius and on the Believe podcast, Believe in the Steelers. That I was questioning the same thing. Especially at home, Freiermuth. Much like when I was there and we had Heath, and I don't know how many times you were in Heinz Field and Heath caught a ball and it might have been a catch for 5 yards, but just mentally the other team felt like, oh God, that sounds like a 25-yard play. And they're doing the same thing with the Muth call. So I've been saying it a lot, get this guy involved. Now I understand Darnell Washington kind of became a piece, but now with the broken arm, he's out. So, he got, whether it's Aaron not having complete confidence, and you heard some of the things after the game against the Ravens. He's like, he ran the perfect shake route down the middle. It was perfect. So I think some confidence is being built. And I think Freiermuth is a key part of the Steelers offense now, obviously along with DK.
You brought up a point. I listened to you on a podcast from last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, talking about the Texans specifically. And we'll talk about the weather element for both the offense and the defense. So right now it's predicted to be, I think, a high of 40 or something, partly cloudy on Monday night. So maybe not wet, but that defense, I don't usually think about this in terms of defense, but the Texans defense is so fast and so aggressive that if there's any kind of dicey field conditions at all, maybe that balances things out.
Yeah, I just called it maybe a silver lining, because the defense is so fast. So let's say we saw the kicker loop slip slightly on that final kick. I think defense travels in the playoffs for history of the NFL. But this defense is so fast. I just thought, if they're sprinkling holy water in the end zones, maybe, if it's not freezing, there's a little extra moisture going on there. Anything to, it's not going to hurt the Steelers offense because they generally aren't a fast offense. But, if the conditions aren't perfect, I do think that it could be an element of leveling a little things up, especially for some of those tackles that got to handle the Danielle Hunters and Anderson Jr. coming off the edge.
Yeah, what is that holy water thing? That's not a weekly thing?
I never saw it when I was there. Yeah, I blame the miss on Mike Tirico because I'm a big believer that announcers jinx kickers, and he was going on about Loop. They searched the world far and wide, and they wanted to find the man made for this moment. I'm like, he's jinxing them right now.
It was nuts. It was I'm a rookie, a young kicker missing a field goal. I don't think it doesn't rise to the level of immaculate reception or immaculate extension or anything like that. But I feel like there is something. Okay, if we're gonna get into the supernatural, all right. I do not like these talks about streaks when it comes to football teams. Like, okay, this team hasn't lost this game since whatever, because it's different coaches, it's different players, it's everything else. But Mike Tomlin undefeated on Monday night at home. But then you go with the Steelers back to 1991 was the last time that they lost a Monday night football game at home. Is there anything other than just maybe flukishness that explains that? Is there anything about the environment or those coaches or something that explains that?
I don't know. My father was still working for the Steelers in '91. He was part of that last
right?
money the personnel director. No, he wasn't. He
You
was.
worked on the equipment staff when you were a kid, right?
I was a ball boy,
You're a ball
growing
boy,
up
yeah.
with
Yeah,
all
sorry,
the
yeah, I
great
didn't
Steeler
mean- I knew you
teams.
in personnel.
He
Yeah.
was drafting them. I was,
Yeah.
cleaning their cars and taking their laundry away. But a very superstitious man. We had to sit in certain seats in the car, going to games in the house, whatever it is. So I don't know. Somehow, these streaks happen and they get so big that you're like, what? How is this even possible? Because, you're talking about Cowher. They haven't lost in Cowher's entire tenure or Mike Tomlin's, but right now we're jinxing it in favor. So you're probably happy about this conversation.
Yeah, we're going to talk about nothing but this for the rest of the show. I do. The one thing, if I was trying to think of it, it's not just a fluke. And look, the Steelers have had good teams throughout most of that, from the 90s on. I think that there is something about when you play in either of those two stadiums, Three Rivers or Acrisure or Heinz Field. There's something about it as a player that I loved playing up there because it feels like you're going into a small town in Western PA or something. Like you might as well be playing Tom Cruise's high school team.
Yeah, Friday Night Lights.
Yeah. And there's this, it's all about ball. They don't have a whole lot of extra stuff going on in the stadium. There's no cheerleaders or anything. And that when you drive in, because you know how Pittsburgh is, it's like you're plunged down into the city. You come out of some little burrow on the side of a hill down into the city. It just felt more intense because I was on the Jaguars back in the old AFC Central. So we go up there every year, and I loved it. And I don't want to, I don't know if intimidating is the right word, but it's a different environment, a different feel. I got to think for the Texans' own sake that it's just flukishness, and I choose to focus on the other streaks like the playoff losses and all of those things.
Yeah, I think this, I don't think those things are a factor. I agree with what you said. It's kind of like when you go in to play Buffalo, you feel like you're in a neighborhood. Now, Pittsburgh, you come into the city, but, or Green Bay, it just feels like you're in the middle of a neighborhood with guys out with trash cans, with fires going and they're in snowsuits. So it's not quite like Buffalo or Lambeau, but it does have its own little personal cool feel to it, especially with Heinz and Al-Shaair being open and you can see, the city and all those things. But, I think a lot of demons have to be exercised in a lot of different areas. C.J., I love C.J., but he's got to prove he can go out and string a couple playoff games together. The Steelers have their own issues just with, all year, what exactly are they? 1 week the defense looks, formidable. The next week the offense does, but they haven't really been able to put it all together for whatever reason. So, I always look at path to victory for each team. And for me, in the Texans, I got to believe that if they don't allow DK to be a major factor, I got to believe, the Steelers run game just, there's been a couple weeks where you get excited. I love watching Gainwell run. I love watching Warren run. But I'm just not seeing a complete identity, and I can say the same things, on the Houston's offensive side. I love Nico Ryans. I love CJ, but, can the running backs get it done? They're very similar in the running back area. I think both teams have guys that are, have a little, pit bull to them. They're going to run hard. And, if there's openings, they're going to make plays. But, I kind of wash that. I think they're probably pretty equal in that area. And then it comes down to receivers, tight ends. Where do you stack them? I don't know. It's, now defensively, if the Steelers all of a sudden have one of those Steeler defensive performances and T.J. Watt's on fire, I think this addition of Warren as a rookie is really a difference maker for him. Cam Heyward, obviously. But, if you tell me Stingley and Lassiter are healthy, I got to give the edge, to the Texans secondary. So, it's a pretty well balanced game. I think that will come down to the fundamentals of who runs the football the best, who stops it the best, who doesn't allow big plays, like you said, and obviously who doesn't give the ball to the other team.
Yeah, and that last part, not giving the ball to the other team. The Texans offense has been really good at protecting the ball this year. And it's one of the sayings I heard from multiple different coaches in the NFL that it's not like it's a great rallying cry or anything, but it's true, is more games are lost than won in the NFL. And the mental errors or the sacks that you take or the interceptions that you throw, like those things, those add up. And I think if there's a step with CJ this year, for one, the offense has been very herky-jerky, but they've progressed along the way to where they're more consistent. They've been good in the fourth quarter. Like, they've been able to get critical first downs to at least keep the defense off the field in the fourth quarter and maintain leads. Like Woody Marks, the rookie running back, he's 205 pounds, but we've got multiple times this year where he's bulldozing guys to get a first down that closes the game out. But CJ hasn't, like, the most encouraging things have been some of the things that aren't electrifying to watch. Like, he's not taking sacks. He's not making sacks that he does take worse by bailing out the back of the pocket. But part of it is that he's getting rid of the ball real fast. So the last 3 games, he hasn't gotten sacked at all. The offensive line has gotten better at, it's not a great rushing attack, but they're not allowing tackles for a loss. They're more hemmed up and they're not making mental errors. And that so far has been enough. It's just a matter of, all right, does that sustain you through 4 games in the playoffs? Can you, like, it's hard to ride a defense all the way through the playoffs. And maybe the Broncos in 2015 were probably the last team to do it.
Yeah, because Peyton really couldn't throw any longer. But no, I think CJ sitting for the whatever it was, 3-4 games, and watching Mills win games without being a superhero. And I think that was really big because it is a different perspective. If you're CJ Stroud and you're sitting there and you're like, wait, he's not throwing for 1,000,000 yards. The defense is making plays. Punting's okay. Just don't make those tragic air plays. I think that probably helped him a bunch. And then I think your young offensive coordinator, it takes time to get a real feel to get through a game. You designing the plan's one thing, but then navigating through a game and the ebbs and flows of football as you know it. I think he's getting his feet under him, and I think that's all coming together a little bit for the entire group. So, I think it's going to be a really interesting game. I love the Texans. I love D'Amico. He and Mike Tomlin, a lot of similarities in the energy. I enjoy coaches that you see. We saw Mike Tomlin very animated on the sideline in that game against the Ravens. You see it with D'Amico. I like that because the players respond to it a little bit. Now they still keep their cool and make good decisions, but I think this is a really evenly matched game that I think on paper I got to think the Texans are the better team, but you're being thrown into Al-Shaair in Pittsburgh and that whole melee of terrible towels and energy. So, I don't know. I think it kind of comes out even to me. I think it's going to has a possibility of being a really good game.
Yeah, FanDuel right now has the Texans as 3-point favorites over the Steelers. One thing that's interesting about the Texans defense this year is that they don't disguise a whole bunch. They're not running a boatload of sim blitzes all the time and everything the way the trends are in the NFL right now. And I'm curious about your perspective as an offensive coordinator, because it seems like in some respects the old defenses that could just line up and play, those have fallen out of favor, and so much more of it is about the Brian Flores dynamic and things like that. What's it when you face a team like the Texans, who I get a little nervous, like, because there's so many advanced stats that show that they don't disguise their coverages or they don't disguise their blitzes. They play a lot of match, so they're kind of disguised already, but by the way they line up, because you don't know exactly how they're going to handle everything that you're throwing at them. But what is it about the Texans that allows them to have a more simplistic approach, quote unquote simplistic approach?
I think they got a lot of really good players.
Yeah.
I think if you have a lot of good players and you're still doing a lot of that stuff you're talking about, you're trying to become a head coach. I think when you have a lot of good players, you can dial it down, keep it simple, let guys play fast. Not make them worry about a lot of things. You can appreciate that as a defensive player, that when you just knew what your job was and you could go full speed motor on all the time. There's something to be said for that on both sides of the football, but I think they got a lot of really good players. Aaron Rodgers, if there were a lot of complexity to this defense, he would kind of nullify that because, he just has such command at the line of scrimmage, especially at home. He's going to use cadence. He's going to diagnose most everything that's happening. So, it's not a big deal in this case. I think you got really good players that can play fast and do their job without any question of what they're supposed to do or trying to cover up or pretend. You want guys playing fast, and I think that's what DeMeco and this group has been able to do.
The over-under on FanDuel is 39.5. We've been really comfortable seeing over-unders in the 30s with the Texans this year. And without insulting the offense has gotten to the point where they're mediocre, but it's they tend to be lower scoring affairs.
Yeah, I think the Steelers' approach will be generally, they do better in games like last week, I think, when there's a big back like Derrick Henry that they can spread the message, smash the run. We have to smash the run and let the quarterback beat us. I think this is a little more problematic, the Texans, because, I still think it'll always start with stop the run. But like I said, Nico Collins is a big, long dude. He can score from anywhere on the field. I think that gives a little more problems to this Steeler defense when they can't just focus. You saw it last week. They're 5 down the whole game.
Yeah.
I mean, they were rushing some form of 5. They were not. Now, Henry still, got some yards, but most of them came on the first carry. And then they pretty much, did a good job against them. But, I think they enjoy when they can have that focus. Now, would I, as a defensive guy, say, all right, we got to do everything to stop Nico Collins? I don't think that would be the approach because all of a sudden Woody Marks and those guys, you'd be creasing them. So I think it's a little bigger challenge, this week. You got 2 really good pass rushers. You got running backs that can hurt you if you're not careful. And you got a receiving group, led by Nico that can really do some damage if you're not careful.
I was reading an article, I think it was in The Athletic, and it was a Mike Sando article in The Athletic where he has Sando always has unnamed executives and unnamed scouts and everything. And one of them said something along the lines of the 3 guys who are past their prime or just almost washed or whatever. And he said Aaron Rodgers, T.J. Watt, and Cam Heyward. And I get it at least. I can't remember what the verbiage was, but at least I get it where T.J. Watt hasn't been like the peak version of himself this year. Aaron Rodgers obviously doesn't have too much long in the NFL. But every time I watch a Steelers game, Cam Heyward's wrecking shop. Like he does. He's 7 years old, 36 years old.
36, going to be 37, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that guy shouldn't be getting paid whatever his team is paying him. I haven't seen any evidence that Cam Heyward isn't still a real extreme stud.
And what a leader he is. I mean, I thought one of the most beautiful games or in that game last week was seeing him push his brother into the end zone on whatever they call their version of the tush push. I thought that was pretty cool to be able to push your brother in for a touchdown. But Cam is, he's so adept at knowing when he can get to the quarterback, when he can't, and then he's very good at batting passes. T.J. Watt, in my mind, I mean, is he getting at the back half? Yeah, but I wouldn't play too much into that. I was there when we drafted him. This guy is one of the most complete football players that I've seen. I mean, he's aware that catch, the off the batted ball, that's not easy. But the ball finds him because he's working so hard and he has such great awareness. So if there's a ball on the ground with his big mitts, he generally is going to be the guy that comes up with it. So yeah, Aaron, he's at the back end. How much does he have left? I don't know, but as he lost some ability to move, absolutely. We saw him on the one scramble outside in the past. He probably would have got a first down, but he got run down. So, there's some limitations, but as far as throwing the football, and making decisions and the ball coming out, and Cam got paid last year, I think. I mean, at that age, that's unheard of for a defensive lineman. So, he's just he's a Steeler through and through, as is TJ. So, they're getting there, but I don't think they're there yet.
I gotta ask you about this before I let you go, because you were one of my favorite characters. I'm going to call you characters on Hard Knocks Cleveland, because of I thought it was the perfect display of analytics meeting old school football mentality. And not that you're anti-analytics or anything. I have no idea how you feel about it. But there comes a time where all of a sudden, like, they're telling you that they got to rest all of these different receivers. And you're saying, we got to practice. Like, we don't have enough bodies to practice with. Where are you on that? And like how all of it's been integrated into the NFL?
Well, Seth, analytics has always been a part of football. That's when you're studying the tapes. Now it's much easier now. You can put on a filter and get all the answers you need. But, that is analytics. Now, to me, analytics is it applies to any, I don't want to say dumb, but any person out there in the stratosphere that watches a football game, and you could put on there, you should go now. This is a go situation.
Yeah.
And they're like, yep, you should go. Well, no, you better have a pulse of how your defense is playing. What's the weather like? Are you moving the football on offense? How much are points going to matter?
Our running back is drunk.
It's still, I think the great head coaches, you can't just be a robot. There's a human being and human beings playing defense. That it used to kill me. I had a young coordinator, a long time ago, and he'd go, it's 100% when teams are in this personnel group, in this formation, this is what they do. And I'm like, how many times? He's like, 4. I'm like, you think it's not going to change?
No,
I don't want any 100%ers.
Thank you for telling me that. I've told that story about me as a player sitting in a meeting, and a defensive coordinator said that about how they were set. It was even worse because it was like it's 75% run, and it was like a sample size of 4. And I'm looking around. I'm like, what the hell are we doing here? Or even the worst is when it's 100%, because you're basically saying that the other coach is an idiot and doesn't realize they've got some tendencies by that point.
Oh, I sat there. I said, it's not a computer over there. There is a human being making. You can see Belichick do the same thing to Bunch for 3 weeks in a row. When you played him, guaranteed you're getting a completely different thing.
Well, it's
just
that goes back to the fact that the Texans don't necessarily disguise their coverages a lot. We've seen DeMeco use that to his advantage. It's like, hey, what you see is what you're going to get. And last year in the playoffs, or 2 years ago, Christian Harris had a interception return for a touchdown. And it was because they'd shown a look that Joe Flacco had seen before and had some success against. And then because they don't do it all that often, they rotate their coverage, and boom, it was an easy.
All you got to do it is once. You just got to do it once. No, I'm with you. I'm glad you feel that way. 100%. Well, what's the sample size?
Exactly,
three times.
Exactly the same thing. I used to get so nervous, man. Whenever a coach tells you with confidence, they're like, this is what you're going to see. We were playing the Chargers once. And we had a defensive lineman who had played for Marty Schottenheimer. And wait, am I blanking? Yeah, Schottenheimer. And our coordinator was putting up some stat about how they're always running out of this. They're always running out of this. And I looked over. His name was Jerry Deloche. She was like, no, he's gonna get us. And sure enough, boom. But you're
That's
right.
Funny.
You're right. It is always. I think that's where I think sometimes people think that football coaches just caught on to numbers or something. Like, no, back to especially once computers became a thing in the 80s. But yeah, we've always been given big dossiers full of information beforehand. It's just we've got more advanced math and analytics tools, but coaches have always,
And it allows other people that aren't football people to throw on a computer and pull out the numbers.
Yeah.
And they're not the ones in the dark watching the tape, breaking. I started as a quality control coach. I'm every front, every blitz. What gap are they? I'd go down to the offensive coach and they're like, you're an idiot. No, this isn't the B gap. This is the A gap. That guy's not blitzing. That's not a shade. So now it allows, because you can flip on a computer, it allows anybody to put it in there. Like, people can watch the all 22 now. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes that you can allow to happen.
You know what? I mean, I've learned more about coverages, and especially, man, I wish I'd learned more about pass pro when I was a defensive lineman, when I was a player, like really dialing in on exactly the rules and everything. But the biggest thing is, man, there's some really smart people out there who break down a lot of film and watch a lot of things, but there's a tendency for people to think they know what coverage a defense is playing and what the rules are. And it's hard because somebody will ask you like, well, who screwed up on this play? And you just you never know. Like we'd
put the defensive cards up in the coverage, and me, and whether it was Kurt Warner or Ben, would be like, somebody screwed up. This player, this is not a coverage, and the defense coaches are like, yeah, they did this. And I'm like, there's no way this was the coverage. Somebody screwed up. So
I mean, it's just, there's so many times where cornerbacks take the heat for a safety not being in the right spot, and like, I remember talking to Wade Phillips once, and it was, like Wade, I can't say it as eloquently as however he said it, but I was watching, he was doing some TV stuff with us that year. And so it was cool to be able to watch with him. But I remember there was a play where a cornerback had made a mental error, and Wade was like, well, that's what cornerbacks do. That's on the safety. It's his job to make him right. I'm like, oh, all right. Like, and then he was serious. He wasn't just saying it kind of folksy. Like, he's like, nope, my safeties need to be smart enough to get him right and figure it out. But
well, I was watching with Steeler fans last week, and early in that game, T.J. Watt had the C gap, so he's closing on the potential handoff, and then Lamar kept it, and Duggar's the safety, and everybody in the room is like, TJ, he's an idiot. What's he doing? I'm like, he's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. The safety didn't contain, so it's just mind-boggling.
The defensive line side of that is, man, like there's so many times in a game where especially you're supposed to be running a game or a stunt or something, and when one guy doesn't do it, when the defensive end is supposed to slant inside and you're the defensive tackle and you're just waiting for your guy to get picked, and you're like, and there's nothing there. They blame you. But you just don't know. You gotta get to your hairstylist or something. I'm gonna let you go. Thanks to FanDuel for sponsoring the Believe in Texans podcast. Your Twitter handle is at T Haley. No, at
Todd Haley.
The Todd Haley. And what number were you in high school? I don't want to give away. Actually, I'm going to divulge something personal of yours if I go any further. So, well, thanks to Believe for sponsoring us.